Hello and welcome back to my channel. On this video, I'm going to be talking about the 24 books that I was able to read in the month of November. And there are some really good ones in here, so I'm excited to share a little bit more about what I was able to get to from my list. The first book that I read is one called Whale Fall by Daniel Kraus. And this is one that I actually read when I was traveling. I had a trip in early November, and so I was reading this and listening to it actually when I was in the airport. And this was a great book to be reading while I was traveling because it was very immersive and entertaining. The basic premise of this is there is a man who's a diver and he ends up getting basically eaten by a whale and he's trying to get out of the whale. And the question I had asked myself when I first saw this was, is this going to be kind of a book similar to like The Martian by Andy Weir, where you have this kind of man against the elements and he's trying to figure out kind of what to do, and there's kind of these science aspects and other things. And I actually think that was a really nice comparison. Certainly not as technical as The Martian, but definitely incredibly creative, and I really actually enjoyed this book quite a bit. The next book I picked up is one called The Last One by Will Dean. And this is also one that had a really fun premise that I was excited to dive into. And basically what this is about is there is a woman who goes onto a cruise ship and she's there and she's kind of meeting people, and she wakes up one morning and the entire cruise ship is empty and the person she's traveling with is not there anymore, and she has to kind of figure out what has happened. Now, I don't want to go into any more detail because there is a ton of spoilers and there's a lot of twists and turns in this one. So I would just say if that's a premise that's kind of interesting to you, I would definitely recommend picking that one up. Next up, I picked up John Green's Turtles All the Way Down. Now, this is one of the only books I think in John Green's backlist that I had not read. If you are not familiar with John Green, he is someone who writes YA fiction, young adult fiction, and typically with a little bit of romance tied in. And he also has some great representation of kind of mental health issues for young adults. In this particular book, you have a main character, a female main character who has OCD. And so you're seeing kind of some things there. And I loved this book. I love John Green's work. I have enjoyed everything that I've read from him. I thought that the representation of OCD in this was really well done, and would definitely recommend this one as well. Okay, then I picked up a book called Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is the second book in the Part of Your World series. The first book in that series is called Part of Your World, and another book that I really loved. So I feel like I got super lucky in like a lot of the early books I picked in November because I just had one good book after another. This book, what I really liked about it is there is kind of an unnamed autism representation in one of the characters. So this is not something that is overtly discussed, but based on how the male main character is described, it is heavily implied that he is autistic. And that this is kind of coming into how he's developing a relationship with the female main character in the story. I have loved Abby Jimenez's work, and I feel like this is one of the stronger books that she is giving kind of representation to with some of these kind of identity issues that she's bringing into the book as well. And I feel like her romances are also just incredibly realistic in terms of what she's representing. In this particular one, you have two medical professionals, like doctors, who are coming to know each other. They work together. And there's this really kind of nice start to their relationship where they're writing letters back and forth, which is really fun. And they come to know each other and develop a relationship. So highly recommend that one as well. Then I picked up the first book in the Invisible series, which is called Invisible. And this is by James Patterson, and he is co-authoring this with David Ellis. And I've read both of these authors together individually in the past, but not co-writing together. And basically this is a story about an FBI agent, a female FBI agent, who is trying to piece together these crimes. And one of the victims of the crimes is her sister. And so she's kind of personally invested in this series of crimes. But the way that she's pieced these crimes together as being connected to each other, nobody believes her that these are connected to each other. And she's calling in kind of all of her friends and kind of all of her, she has this ex-husband who she's trying to kind of have help her get the FBI to kind of pay attention to this. And finally, there's a couple clues that come together that people start to pay attention, and then they're going after this person who's doing this very kind of complex set of crimes. I really liked this. Very fast-paced, very interesting in terms of kind of how the plot was being put together. And I'm definitely going to pick up the next one in this series. All right, the next book that I picked up is a book called The Three Marriages by David Whyte, and this is about reimagining work, self, and relationship. Now, this book is slightly different. I'll say that I liked it, but it is coming from kind of this like philosophical background. David Whyte is a poet, and so this is definitely not kind of like a fast-paced thriller like some of the other things that I was reading this month. It was definitely more of kind of a reflective understanding of how your work relationship, your relationship with yourself, and then your relationship with like a partner, how all of these things are kind of intertwined and connected. I love the concept of that, and I found this book to be highly interesting in terms of thinking about these things. I will say that I don't feel like there were concepts that were really like a hook or like highly memorable. It was more just kind of this philosophical way of thinking about it. But I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed kind of getting a chance to reflect on that more deeply. All right, then I picked up IQ. This is the first book in the IQ series by Joe Ide. And this is a book that is basically almost like a Sherlock Holmes retelling, but in like this urban environment with this male main character who is like picking up all of these kind of signs and signals and putting things together and putting clues together in a way that allows him to have almost like a savant-like way of solving crimes. And I found this to be really kind of like fresh in its approach. And there were a lot of complexities in this first book in terms of like the relationship between this character and other characters in the neighborhood and kind of what he was trying to do, his motivations. I would definitely pick up another book in this series, and it just felt kind of different to me than other books that I've read that are kind of more traditional mysteries, and I appreciated that approach. Okay, the next book I picked up is called The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni. This is the first book, I believe, in a trilogy that is the Prison Healer trilogy. I loved this book. It was so great. I had heard raves about this from a number of people, and I totally understand why. Basically, the general story is you have this woman who works in a prison as the healer in the prison. And so this is not like a contemporary prison. This is definitely kind of like a fantasy novel. And she is asked to kind of heal or help this prisoner who comes in. And the prisoner who's brought in is this like rebel queen. And the rebel queen is so ill that part of what they're planning to do is put this rebel queen through like a series of tests or like challenges that she has to do. And if she can't complete the challenges, like they're just going to kill her, and or she'll die through the challenges. And so the healer says, I want to step in on behalf of this rebel queen, and like I'm going to take her challenges. I'm going to compete, and because there's just no way this rebel queen can survive. And so she ends up stepping in and going through these challenges. So much more happens in this book. The ending is super fun in terms of kind of how it like pivots toward book 2. And I'm really excited about finishing out this trilogy. Also a book that I would totally consider reading again. It's one of those books that when you get to the ending, you want to kind of go back and start from the beginning again. Then I picked up Lionel Shriver's The Post-Birthday World. And this is a book that I think I had described in my TBR video as like a Sliding Doors kind of knockoff, in that if you're familiar with the movie Sliding Doors, it's basically how a person's life can change based on kind of the hinge of one action. So in Sliding Doors, she either catches a train or she doesn't catch a train, and it kind of impacts all of these actions following on from that. In this particular novel, the hinge action is this woman takes a kind of family friend out to dinner for his birthday, and they go back to his house, and she either kisses him or does not kiss him. They're both married. And based on kind of what happens there, it branches off into these two different kind of timeline storylines. I really, really liked this. I feel like Lionel Shriver is just incredibly gifted in terms of craft. So whether or not kind of like the plot is like something that I'm actually interested in or whatever, you know, like there's several other books of hers that I've read that are just so well done. My favorite is We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is a book that just like crushed me. Like it's just so good, and also like incredibly heartbreaking and difficult to read. This one less so, did not crush me, but I did really enjoy the storyline and kind of how she was branching off these different stories throughout the book. Okay, Now, I also picked up several books in the Kay Scarpetta series. If you've been following along this year, you know I'm trying to read the entire Kay Scarpetta series by Patricia Cornwell, and I was able to read books 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. So those books, I'm not going to go into detail on the plots, but book number 18 is called Port Mortuary. And then the 19th book in that series is called Red Mist. The 20th book in the Kay Scarpetta series is called The Bone Bed. Book number 21 is called Dust. And then book number 22 is called Flesh and Blood. And of those 5 that I read, I will say that the one that really stuck out to me was Red Mist. It was probably my favorite of the 5 and one of my favorite of the latter of the series, just because of with such a long running series, what Patricia Cornwell is doing is she's taking kind of earlier characters in the series and letting them evolve in like very different directions. And like some of them become like criminals, for example, over time, or they have like a backstory that you don't know early in the series, but that you come to understand later in the series. It's really interesting. And so Red Mist was one of the ones that stuck out to me because it took kind of this earlier character that we'd become familiar with, and there was kind of this departure in terms of their storyline that was really interesting. Okay, the next book I read is called Imaginable by Jane McGonigal. And the subtitle for this is How to See the Future Coming and Feel Ready for Anything, Even Things That Seem Impossible Today. Jane McGonigal identifies as a futurist, and this is a book that she's basically written to help other people understand how futurists think about things. And I loved this book so much. I'm so interested in the concept of futurism and how people think about like what is right now kind of unimaginable, but could become, reality in the future. And one of the things I really liked about this book is it's kind of highly practical, and it has these exercises to kind of let you practice some of the things that she's talking about. I could definitely see reading this book as like a book club book and like talking about it with other people because I just found it really fascinating. Okay, next up I read If I Die Tonight by Allison Galen. And this is a book that has kind of at its core a storyline of like a unreliable narrator. You have a woman who comes into a police station and she says that basically somebody was trying to kind of like hijack her car, and in the process of doing this, they hit somebody with her car, and there's somebody who is injured, in this situation. But we're not sure what exactly happened in that particular thing. And like, this is one of those books that I will say the first 75% of it, I was kind of like, well, this is like a typical thriller, not super memorable, like, it's okay. And then the last 25%, or maybe even the last like 15 or 10% where you kind of understand what was going on, it was really good in terms of kind of like what the author was doing and some of the like red herrings that they had in this kind of mystery thriller. But I feel like the first part of the book felt kind of ho-hum to me. And then it got really good at the end. So it could be that I just wasn't paying enough attention in the beginning. I don't know. But I did really like kind of where it ended. Okay, the next book I read is called Call It What You Want by Brigid Kemmerer. This is an author that I love. She does young adult kind of romance books that I just really have enjoyed. There are 2 others of hers that I've read that fall into that category, and this was a third. And this is the story of 2 teenagers. The girl is kind of struggling with a cheating scandal that she was involved in like the previous year. And also that her sister has come home from college and is pregnant and is not telling, people that that's what's going on. And then you have a male main character whose father was involved in kind of this like financial scandal with the town. And his father attempted to commit suicide and was not successful, and is now basically in a vegetative state that he and his mother have to take care of his father. But they have this scandal kind of wrapped around them as well. And in this book, they come together because they're in a class together. And I think it's like calculus. They have to do like a calculus project together, and they start to develop a relationship and a friendship. And basically it was just 2 people that are kind of like damaged and struggling and trying to kind of support each other and find support from themselves. I really like this book. I think Brigid Kemmerer, this is really where she hits her stride. And she's just very good at this kind of storyline. Okay, then I picked up Trapper Road, which is the 6th book in the Stillhouse Lake series by Rachel Kane and this one is also co-written with Carrie Ryan. I think I found out when I was reading this book, because I was kind of looking around to see if there are more books in the series, that Rachel Caine died several years ago, which is probably why this is the last book in this series. I don't feel like it wraps everything up as in the last book, and this may be also why she has a co-author on this book as well. But it was a really nice way to conclude this series, knowing what I know, that this author is not going to be producing any more work. General premise of this entire series is that you have a woman who is the wife of a serial killer. And in the very first book in the series, she comes to understand that this is what he is, and he is caught. And then people think that she knew about it when she did not know about it. And then over the course of the series, she kind of becomes like an investigator. She helps find missing people. And then she has a couple of teenage kids that she's also trying to kind of protect from various things that are happening throughout the series. So kind of bittersweet. Like, I was sorry to hear about this author. I've really enjoyed this series and would definitely recommend it. Next up, I read a book called If I Never Met You by Mari McFarlane, and this is a book about kind of a crazy set of circumstances. Like, there's a female main character who's with her partner for like 18 years, like a really long time. They're basically high school sweethearts. And then as adults, he basically comes to her one day and says, I'm not interested anymore. And like, I want to break up. And she thought they were going to be like married, having kids. And that never happened for them. And they work together. They're both lawyers. And so she goes back to work, and not very long after they've had this breakup, and this is not spoiler, I think this is all part of the book description, he starts dating someone else, and this other person gets pregnant. And so she is basically like wanting to one-up him a little bit. And so she starts dating someone else that they work with, who's kind of like a Playboy character. And they're fake dating. It's kind of a fake dating trope. And of course, they start to have kind of feelings for each other. And there were a lot of elements of this that had kind of these very sweet, like either friendship or familial components of like who was surrounding these main characters. There's a situation with the main male character's family that is, a really kind of like also very sweet component of the book that I really enjoyed. So I would recommend this one as well. I feel like some of it is slightly unbelievable in terms of kind of like how they come together in the end. But the process of how they get there was fun to follow along with. Then I picked up The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. I'm slowly working my way through her backlist. I've read a few of her books now. And The Nightingale is a book that had just so many people talking about it. So many people love this book. And I was excited to pick it up. This is a story about two sisters in World War II that are kind of part of the resistance, but in different ways. And I loved the story of this. I listened to it on audio. I was sucked in like immediately from like the first couple of chapters. And it makes me really excited to explore Kristin Hannah's other work. She's got a lot in her backlist, and I'm excited to dive into her other stuff as well. Okay, so November was also the month that we saw the release of Iron Flame. And this is the second book in the Empyrean series by Rebecca Yarros. The first book, of course, is Fourth Wing. Now, I decided, and I'm so glad I did, that I wanted to reread Fourth Wing before I read Iron Flame. And it wasn't that long ago that I read Fourth Wing, but there's a lot of details, and it's basically world building. It's a new fantasy world, and I just felt like I would have a better experience with Iron Flame if I read Fourth Wing again before I read it. So basically, like the week leading into Thanksgiving and then Thanksgiving weekend, I read both of these books again on audio. So Fourth Wing was a second read, and then I dug into Iron Flame. Now, I think if I remember right, Fourth Wing was like 600 pages. I think Iron Flame adds on a couple hundred pages to that. So it's a longer book, and it is meant to be the second book in a 5-book series. Now, general idea of this series is you have a girl who is training to ride dragons. She's going to a school to train to do this. And it's very dangerous. So this is, I feel like it was kind of a mix of like Divergent and almost like a Harry Potter mix up in some ways, because it has kind of that academic feel and like that magic feel. And I loved Fourth Wing, and I really, really enjoyed Iron Flame. I do think Iron Flame is more of a second book in a 5-book series. So you're starting to get more information, more world building. There was more I don't want to go into too much of what was happening in book 2 because it gives away some stuff from book 1. But just that it has a different feel than book 1 in terms of the kinds of events that are happening. But I think we're not going to get book 3 for like another year, but I'm super excited to dive into it when it comes out. Okay, a couple more books that I was able to fit in the month of November. One is the first book in the Honeywood series by Julie Olivia called All Downhill with You. And this is a series that takes place in a theme park, and it has different workers in this theme park having relationships with each other. So there's a woman who works in kind of the marketing department of the theme park, and then there's a male main character who's a consultant that comes in, and he's someone who built the roller coaster. And the marketing person was injured on the roller coaster. Something happened with it, and he's come to kind of investigate what happened. But he's this is definitely kind of a grumpy sunshine trope, and that he's very grumpy, and she kind of wins him over, and they begin to have a relationship. And there are, I think, 4 books in this series. I'm excited to dive into the next one. And then the last book that I read in the month of November is called The Iron King. This is the first book in the Iron Fae series by Julie Kagawa. And I don't think I knew very much about what this series was. Basically, it's kind of a mashup between like a contemporary fiction and fantasy novel, in that you have a girl who's just turning 16, and she gets kind of pulled into this like magical realm, in part because of her age, and is trying to save a family member. Like something has happened with a family member and she's trying to save them. And so she goes through this kind of series of adventures. And I felt like this book was really, it is the first book in I think a 4-book series. And it was really just like setting the stage for what's going to be happening in like the rest of the world building with this series. So I like that kind of mix of like the YA component. This is definitely a YA series. With the fantasy that kind of came in from this other realm that she was diving into. So I'm excited to kind of try out other books in the series and see what I think. So a very, very good reading month in November. So many books that I just loved. And I'm super excited to dive into the last month of the year and see what books I might get to read in December of 2023. Definitely check out my December TBR video, which is going to be posted soon. And check back at the end of next month to see what I'm able to read in this last month of the calendar year. Until then, happy reading.